Coming to you from Rockingham, IPL Radio.
Good afternoon, and I'm joined in the studio by Graham. And Graham is a former Nasho. If you don't know what that is, national servicemen were conscripted, from 1951 to...
Well, good afternoon, listeners.
Yeah, sorry.
There was effectively Nasho's what I term Mark 1 and Mark 2 in the modern times, post the Korean War.
Yep.
There were some obviously in World War I and World War II, but we're going to talk about this afternoon is probably Mark II, which is effectively is commonly known as the Vietnam
years.
The Vietnam years, actually, which is rather contentious, as everyone knows.
Yes, very.
And it's caused much angst in our society and a lot of political divide.
It has. Actually, the gentleman who was on the program before me, who does the 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, he was in the Navy and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we were just talking about Nashos and how poorly the Vietnamese troops were received when they came back. I think they were very poorly treated. And
yes, look, as a general rule, I would agree with that. I think what should be uppermost in everyone's mind is the lag time between effectively when the last battalion group came back. There was 3 battalions and 4 battalion. I'm not sure which one was the last one. As a battalion group when they came back was in 1971/72, I think, from memory. Yeah. But they didn't hold the Welcome Home Parade in Sydney until October 1986. Yeah. Off the top of my head without referring to my notes. Yeah. So there's a huge time lag. It took a long time for the federal government to come to their senses, so to speak.
Yeah. So I have given you a list of questions I was going to ask, so I better not sort of deviate too far from those. But I was going to say, what was your experience when you came back to Australia from serving?
Well, it was all very much rushed, as you can imagine. This is pre-computer age. I think we should keep that uppermost in mind. I was in the Army, maybe just backtrack a little bit, from January 1969 through to January 1971 when I was discharged at Irwin Barracks in Karrakatta, at what they called then the WCPD. That was the Western Command Personnel Depot. That was where people were going into the services and out of the services, and people that were effectively marking time, waiting for various things to happen, medicals, clearances, etc., waiting for discharge. So given that there was hundreds, the long and short of it is that the men there were under pressure. Yep. Trying to deal with all of this in expeditiously as they could, mindful, as I said, it was a pre-computer age, so it was all typing, and if there was an occasional error with typo, it's hardly surprising.
Yeah, I guess under normal circumstances they would have been dealing with a few people at a time, but this was a whole raft of people all at once.
Huge numbers, Alan, huge numbers that were coming back as a battalion group. In some instances, and others were coming back via Qantas, via Darwin, I think, into Sydney, and then they would fly back to Adelaide, back to Perth, back to Darwin, etc., etc.
Right. Anyway, I better sort of go through the questions as we've sort of talked about them. Now, the process of being recruited, if you like, for national service. Was a birthday gift from the government?
Well, some people viewed it as that, others didn't. Effectively, it was a birthday ballot based on your date of birth. They extracted, knowing they're going to need X thousand people per year or per quarter, because initially there was 2 intakes in 1965 and then subsequently 4 intakes every other year until 1971, I think, 71, 72. So what would happen is that you would actually have to register, fill out a paper, then the department of then, it doesn't exist anymore, it was called the Department of Labour and National Service. Right. They would write you a letter, yes, you're in, or no, you're out. Okay. Simple as that. And that would include instructions, if you were balloted in, to report to, in the case of WA people, down to Irwin Barracks at Karrakatta.
Right.
Which is over the road from the Karrakatta Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
Bisected by the Fremantle to Perth railway line.
Right.
So we attended there, we had a medical prior to that, and also another cursory medical down there. We were fed, we were sent out to Perth Airport, and I recall getting on a propeller-driven plane, can you believe it? It was a four-engine one, with TAA, because that was the government airline at the time.
Yeah.
That flew us to Mangalore Airport, which is quite close to Puckapunyal, within a short trucking and bus distance. Mangalore has a little bit of a history because it was a World War II training airfield for the RAAF. That's all I know about it. I haven't had the time to research that any further.
No worries.
So it was a short distance to Puckapunyal base.
Yep. So from the time you got your first letter from the department to sort of flying out, what sort of time frame were we talking about?
I think from memory it was probably 2-3 months.
Okay.
Yes, something of that order.
So you had an opportunity to get your affairs in order and...
Yes, you did. A lot of farewells at work and what have you, and there's a huge community discussion about that, as you can well, very, very topical at the time.
Yep.
I was working in local government at the time at the City of Perth, and a fellow workmate who was in another department, he was also called up at the same time, and we left on the same day.
Right.
So, yes, there was a fond farewell.
Yeah. Well, I was one of the ones who got their number pulled out of the barrel, but I failed my medical,
Right.
unfortunately. But the funny thing was, I don't know how it was with you, but I wanted to join up. I wanted to go. So I was a bit disappointed. But in hindsight, I'm now glad I didn't go.
Sure.
It was just sort of, I guess, an exciting time when you're a young person.
Yes, well, Alan, there's an element of adventure in this, not knowing what's around the corner.
Yeah.
And probably at that stage, I was probably getting a little bit bored with my job.
Yeah.
And my father had served in the militia before World War II, all of World War II, etc., like my late father-in-law. Also, they were both POWs, so we had been, particularly our family, brought up with the military always in our background. I was in the school cadets for a couple of years at high school, as was the time. Just about everyone in that era.
And weren't they horrible uniforms?
They were a bit baggy, yes.
And itchy.
And ill-fitting boots.
Yes. Oh, great times. Yeah. And so when you got to Puckapunyal, that's when you started your training?
Yes. They would allocate you to a hut. We're all arranged in alphabetical order. So in the hut I was in, Hut 52, if I remember correctly, we were all in the sort of the middle. My family name is Johnson, so it's the middle part of the alphabet. It was all very orderly. Allocated a bed, which is just a steel bed, a desk, a chair, a locker, and there's a special way that you arrange all your goods and chattels in there, the Army way or no way. If you go to the Army Museum down in Fremantle, there is a typical layout for a recruit's room in a recruit setting, be it Puckapunyal or now for the regular soldiers is at Kapooka in New South Wales.
So were you training with the regular servicemen or separately?
No, the regulars in that era and to this day still train at Kapooka, but we were trained by some regular soldiers. But as an aside, our platoon commander, he was a second lieutenant national serviceman. He had been selected for officer training, so he did the 6 months, about 6-7 months, I think, at Skyville in New South Wales, and he was our platoon commander. Then there was a platoon sergeant who was a regular soldier. He was, I think from memory, he was in artillery, and a couple of other corporals who had been to Vietnam and Borneo. So I think the calibre of the training, in my opinion, was very, very good.
Right. And did you ever mix with, apart from the sergeants and officers, did you ever mix with the regular army at all?
Not at Alan, no, not at that point.
Right.
Because we would go down to what they call the boozer, which is the OR, the other ranks mess, where you drink beer. And some people carry on a little bit. But all the regular soldiers, particularly if you're a sergeant, they would have their own area sergeant's mess probably. I never went there, but I presume that was the case. And of course the officers would have a separate mess. That has changed now with the development of new bases where you find that there's often a combined officers and sergeants mess. Right. And I think that's just driven for no other reason by money.
Yep.
That it's a cheaper way of doing it.
I'd say so, yeah. And Nashos, were all the Nashos sent overseas, or did some stay behind?
A number stayed. The figures I don't know, Alan, but there was a number that were posted in locations, bases all around the countryside.
Yep.
The chap that I mentioned I used to work with, he was posted back to Midland, which suited him fine. I think he was in love at the time, so, so that suited his ends. Other people were posted to Malaysia. There was a couple of battalions up there at the time, or at least one battalion. There was an artillery unit. They were posted to, I think, Butterworth and/or Tarandak barracks just above Malacca on the west coast of Malacca. And there was people that were posted to Vietnam in various capacities. The biggest group, of course, would be to fill up the battalions, because when it all started, we only had 3 battalions. So the army declared, or the government declared, they want to build it up relatively quickly to 9 battalions. So that meant creating another 6 battalions, which most battalions have in between about 800-900 men. Yeah. So that's thousands of men that had to be recruited in a relatively short time.
Right. So how were you treated by when you sort of got posted overseas? You obviously must have mixed with the regulars. How did the regulars sort of treat the Nashos? Were they...
Well, in my particular case, I was very fortunate to be posted to Papua New Guinea, to the 2nd Battalion, PIR, Pacific Island Regiment, which is now called RPIR. They've added the Royal for a bit of class, it seems, which was based at Moam Barracks at Wewak, which is on the north coast of PNG. I was posted to the Medical Corps, which is my background in public health, and it was a very, very good posting. I've recently made contact with the widow of my predecessor, because when I left there, when I first arrived, I could never find out who was my predecessor, so I was pretty inexperienced in that area, in army ways, but you soon learn very, very quickly.
Yeah. So you had no one to show you the ropes?
Correct. And that was a bit of a gap in the whole. That would be my sole criticism of the whole of the system, I think. There was never any handover, takeover from someone coming in, delay the departing person's departure by a week or two to show you the ropes. I had to find my way. And thankfully, a chap who was the RAP, the Regimental Aid Post Medical Corps Sergeant, Sergeant Eddie Wright, he was of great assistance to me.
Right. So how many would have been posted to Papua New Guinea?
In the case of national servicemen, there was 12 teachers who had qualified in teaching before via university or teachers' college. They'd done their basic training, in some cases core training. They were posted to various places in PNG. That group, I was there long enough to be there with 2 groups. Both of them, I think from memory, there was about a dozen. So there was a regular army captain who was the OC of the education unit. The 2 IC was a national serviceman, a lieutenant who had signed on. And then under them there was about a dozen sergeants who were teaching the PIR soldiers all sorts of education subjects, civics, and quite a few other things, mainly with the view in mind that self-government and finally independence was looming.
Yep.
So even though we didn't have a direct role, we had an indirect role, because even if they discharged, they would leave the army and go back to their village. They'd learned how to use a rifle for a start, drive a vehicle, live with other people, etc.
Yeah. So, it's not terribly well known, I don't think, that Nasho served other than Vietnam.
Yes, I would agree with that. There was quite a few also national servicemen down in Moresby in the bases down there. They were at Tarama Barracks, Murray Barracks headquarters, and also there was some out at Golly River, which is the training depot for recruits. In other words, it's the PNG version of Kapuka. So there were similar numbers down there too. And also, I should say, at Ingham Barracks in Ley.
Right. Now, I've never heard of it, but were there any women conscripted under national service?
No.
So it's all...
Male only.
Male only?
Male only, yeah.
Fair enough. And repatriation, what was the situation when you were repatriated? Did you... Because I know I've got a couple of friends who went to Vietnam as Nashos, and when they came back, they got some form of time to get themselves educated and get back into the swing of civilian life.
Of civvy life, yeah. That's correct, Alan. They were. People that had been to Vietnam were offered concessional home loans, number one, which is probably uppermost in their mind at that time, and they're probably, by that stage, they were in their early 20s. You didn't have to apply for that straight away. You could defer that entitlement. And the other one, which interests me, was to improve your education.
Yep.
I wasn't one for liking school too much, so I left pretty early in the piece, but it certainly benefited me. I know of a couple who went on, particularly the teachers, that continued with their, if they'd started a university course, the government assisted in the completion of that, and they've all ended up with various degrees in various areas. A couple of them that I'm aware of, they've ended up doctors of whatever in their further education endeavours. In my case, I was studying meat inspection, so I went over east and I did a full-time course. So instead of doing it for 12 months, I was able to compress it into 3 or 4 months, which suited me just perfectly.
Fantastic. Excellent. And the camaraderie between Nashos and the regulars, was that sort of apparent, or...
Sorry,
the camaraderie.
Camaraderie.
Yeah.
Well, probably the most regulars I had contact with was when I was at 2PIR, Sergeant Eddie Wright, for example, and the OC of Admin Company, of which I was part of. He was a regular soldier. He had been to Korea and also Vietnam. Most of the company commanders, who are generally either at captain or major level, had been to Vietnam, and most of their 2 ICs at that stage. A bit of a divide, I think, between... I was in the sergeant's mess, between the officers and the sergeant. There probably could have been a little bit more liaison between the two, but in that era, I think there was a little bit of a divide, I think. It was sort of broken down on the sporting field with hockey, football, and rugby in particular.
Yeah. So your experience, I would say, wasn't a bad experience for you?
My experience was a very good experience, I would have to say, and more to the point, I think, Alan, would be that I've established some fantastic relationships and friendships from people scattered all around Australia. I probably had more to do with the ones from the eastern states, mostly in Queensland and New South Wales. There's a handful from Victoria, and I'm aware of 2 chaps, one in particular, that live in South Australia, in Adelaide, in the suburbs of Adelaide.
Right. Now, I guess you're in a organisation that Nasho's sort of can join. Is that?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I was a member of the National Servicemen Association,
Right.
but my comment there would be it's just a pity that the various associations around the countryside and another group, which Bob Maguire, Nasho's WA, I think he calls himself, there's been a bit of a divide between the two. But the original National Servicemen's Association, some of the state associations have decided to wind up. I elected to bail out of it a number of years ago because I felt as though it was going nowhere. So I associate myself now with more my colleagues that I was in PNG with.
Right.
It's more to my interest and liking.
Yeah, because I'd imagine the guys who served in Vietnam would probably have very different stories to tell.
I'm sure they would, good, bad, and maybe in many different experiences. Yes, but more to the point, I think, is sadly the losses that we sustained. There was over from memory, from 521 of our good men that were lost in Vietnam. In our particular original platoon at Puckapunyal, we lost one, John McEwett, or John McQuat, depending on how you pronounce it. He was the sole KIA in Vietnam. He was in 8 or 9 battalion from memory, and a number of them were wounded, from what I gather. He was in 8 battalion, and he was killed on the 3rd of April, 1970.
In PNG?
No, in Vietnam.
Oh, in Vietnam.
He was posted to 8 RA.
Right.
RA is an abbreviation for Royal Australian Regiment.
Right.
And he is interred down at Allambie Park in Albany. That is the Karrakatta of Albany.
Yeah.
And both my wife Cheryl and myself have been to his grave, and we've put a poppy on his grave.
Yep. And when the deceased were sent home, were they given proper military funerals?
Yes, they were. If you go down to the Army Museum in Fremantle, there's a couple of photos there of military funerals. Yep. I never witnessed one myself because I was still in the Army at that stage, but I knew of one chap who was actually seconded to attend one of those, who was required to attend one of the military funerals, and he said it was an experience that he had preferred not to have gone through.
Oh, very sad. Yeah. It's a very sad time in our history, wouldn't it?
Very much so. If you do research and find out where all the WA casualties are and all around the countryside, they're scattered all over WA in little country towns. Right. There's some at Karrakatta at the Perth War Cemetery. There's some in the main civilian cemetery. I've seen a few. I think there was one on Kangaroo Island, even in South Australia. We were over there on holidays a few years ago. Yeah. I didn't know him, but I was aware that that was his hometown, Kangaroo Island, in South Australia.
Yep. So, did you participate in the Anzac Day parades?
Yes, I do.
Yep.
Not with the National Servicemen, because I have the banner for my late father's unit, the 2nd 11th Battalion, and I handed it over to a colleague of mine this morning who's kindly taking it into the city for us. I go down to the Cottesloe Civic Centre for our early morning service. It's not a dawn service, but it's early in the morning. Yep. That goes for about an hour and a quarter or something like that. And then we adjourn very, very smartly into the city, and the banner will be in there. We are allocated a location in the city. We're in Sherwood Court, and it all unfolds from there. I've done that for a number of years.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. It's been an education, because a lot of people are aware that Australia sent people to Vietnam, but very few would know of the other activities that national servicemen were asked to fulfil.
Yeah, Alan, if I could just add, there were 2 national servicemen who died on service in PNG.
Right.
I can't recall the names off the top of my head, but one was a misadventure, I suppose best described. He was climbing in the region of Mount Willem, which is the highest peak in PNG, and he was there 1 minute and gone the next. There's been various accounts, but probably the most probable thing that he toppled over an edge and his remains were never found.
Right.
But he has been memorialised on a stone, a rock up there. There's been search parties out there, et cetera, over the decades, but he's never been found. And the other one that I'm aware of was a motor vehicle accident in Port Moresby.
Right.
I know his name was John Martin. I never met him, but I have read accounts of his demise.
Yep. Have you ever been back to PNG?
No, I haven't. Currently contemplating that at the moment with a colleague of mine who lives in an adjacent suburb. Yes, we are giving it some thought, but no firm decisions yet.
Right, very good. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in. It's been very interesting hearing of your experiences. And, enjoy Anzac Day on Saturday.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation, Alan. And I hope maybe my prophetic words have had some benefit for people to explain the background to that. Very controversial, as everyone knows, and we hope that as time ticks on, people that had any beefs with the government, they will just move into old age in a graceful sort of way.
Good man. Thank you very much.